Let's kick off our third-party modules discussion with requests. This is a beautiful module, beautiful library. Again, I use those terms interchangeably. It may not be perfectly correct, but collection of modules or code that we can use, right? So request is a beautiful library that helps us make HTTP requests, and it abstracts the complexities of that. I love this module. It's probably my favorite Python module, and I've used it for things such as web scraping, data from cruise lines. I've gotten all of the sailings from a cruise line with all the data and put that into a nice format for use. I've checked prices online and sent myself an email when prices decrease for certain things, for some furniture, for example. I've used this professionally a lot as well, working with APIs. So that's one of the key functions of requests is hitting APIs. It hits APIs, it hits websites, and it can pull that data down for you, and you can use it as you'd like. So requests.get, talking about some of the key functions here, will get, and these are REST API, this is REST API terminology, get, post, put, delete. Get will pull down the URL. It will get it and get the data. Post will update data or send data. Same with put. There's a little bit of a difference between the two. Make, but we're not going to get too much into that. Actually, I want to highlight the get method. And then delete will delete data from an API. So what I want to focus on is pulling down the data. And you can dive in as much as you'd like with this requests module for the other methods. But if we use request.get, we often assign that to a response variable, as we see in this code snippet here. And we've imported requests. We set a response variable. That could be anything, but response is kind of the standard variable name. Assign that to request.get and then our API endpoint or our website URL. And then once we get that response, some attributes are .text or .status code. Status code will give us a 200. For example, if you're familiar with HTTP status codes, it will give us a 200 if everything went well, pulling the data. Response.text gives us the content of the response as a string. So if we're hitting a website, it'll just give us all that HTML. And then JSON will turn the data, if we're hitting an API, into a dictionary, into a Python dictionary. If it's JSON data at that API endpoint, we'll get back a dictionary in Python. So extremely, extremely useful stuff, both professionally and personally. And that's why I wanted to start off with this module. I think it's a great one to learn. So let's look at it in our IDE with some examples. So I have already installed request. Remember, with these third-party modules, we need to install them. But from a terminal or command prompt, we could do pip install requests to install that using pip. And we see a requirement already satisfied, requirement already satisfied. All these are already installed. But if that weren't installed, you'd have to do pip install requests with these third-party libraries. So then we also need to import so that it actually gets compiled at runtime when our program runs. So import requests, and then response equals request dot, and we see these different methods and things from request. Where another benefit of using IDEs is it helps us with that. I'm going to do request.get, and let's start with https://www.python.org. Let's just get a website. Now let's see what happens here. And then let's print response. I'm just going to set a breakpoint here. And if we look at python.org, it's a website. It's a web page. If we right click here, maybe you've done this before, and we click inspect. I'm in the Chrome browser. Every browser does this a little bit differently. We can see the actual HTML code. That's what makes the browser display this way and gives it its content, and that HTML can pull things from JavaScript and populate things dynamically. But ultimately, this is what we're going to be pulling, this HTML. So let's run this. So we've gotten to this point. We've done request.get, and we've set that into a response variable. Let's look at response. So we see various attributes here that we could access. Headers, that could be an interesting one. Links, raw, request. We've got the actual text. That's the actual content. That's the text content. There's another variable called content, which will give us raw bytes, which I'm not going to discuss, but lots of parameters here. So that's what's contained in that response variable. Okay. And if we look at actually printing the response, if we continue execution, that's 200. So what we could do, what if we print, I'm going to stop debugging. What if we print response dot status code? It's also 200. So status code is one thing we can use. That's just returned, it looks by default in response as kind of the return of that. But if we do response.status code, that's the proper way of doing this. So we could also print response.text, which will just print the raw HTML as a string. See, so this is just HTML. There's our end tags. And if we go all the way to the top, well, it doesn't have that big of a buffer for us to see all the way to the top in the terminal here. But that's just our HTML, response.text. Now, let's, so we could do what we wanted with that. There's other libraries that are useful. Beautiful Soup is one we'll likely add to this course sooner rather than later. That really helps with parsing HTML and making it useful for us. We could be looking for certain things. That's another Python library. But now that we have that response, we have that data, we could look at a website, analyze it, do something with it, whatever we desire. Like I said, I've looked at cruise sailings on ships for prices and dates. I've looked at prices of furniture. I've done all sorts of things. So very useful. So I wanted to show you that. Now, the next thing I want to show you is what if we're hitting an API endpoint? And API stands for Application Programmable Interface. And that's just a way to present data to us, to interact with some data, essentially. So there's a nice API that I really like that I've discovered recently, and it's restcountries.com. It's just an open source API, free to consume, and it gives us a lot of information about countries. So we can access it by hitting this page. We could also limit it if we put a question mark and then we say fields equals, and then put the fields that we want. So name, flags, or other things. I'm just going to hit this API right here, that URL, and we see it's a bunch of JSON data about countries. So this country's South Georgia. We could look at another one. This country's Grenada. And each one of these we see, we've got an open square brace and then a bunch of data in which will become dictionaries. So this will become a list when we pull this in with JSON, the JSON module into Python. It'll become a list with one element. Just one list is what I mean to say, with a lot of different elements. And each item in the list is a dictionary. And then we can access, just as we would a dictionary, all this data based on our keys. We could access that. Languages that are spoken there, latitude, longitude, maps, flag, population, all sorts of data. So this is the API we're going to be hitting. And one disclaimer as well, we shouldn't be web scraping things or pulling data from websites unless we are confident that we're able to. Some websites don't like us pulling data. So this is one that's very open source and free to do. So I just wanted to point that out, that you could get into trouble if you start pulling a bunch of data and you're not supposed to. So just be cautious with that. So let's come back here to our Python and let's go to this other URL. Let's hit this API. REST countries.com/v3.1/all. That's the endpoint that website provides us to access. And let's then say if response.status code equals 200, then data equals response.json. So we're going to bring it in as, we're going to see that it's JSON. We're going to bring it in as dictionaries, as a list and a dictionary for us to use in Python. So let's pause right here. Let's print data. Let's set a breakpoint and let's run this. Okay, so there we are. So we've got our response. We've gotten down to here, so the response clearly is 200. If we look at that response, we could see that as well. Status code 200, that attribute. And data is now response.json. So if we look at data, we have all these dictionaries. Here's one dictionary, and it has all these key value pairs for that specific country. So that's what gets pulled into data. And we have hundreds of countries. There's 250 items. That's the length of this list. So we've gotten to that point. Let's stop debugging. I mean, that's pretty much it. If we wanted to print out a certain component of this, we could. Let's see. Let's show that. So this is going to be, let's try and print Sierra Leone here. So this will be a list, our 0th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, our 3rd index position in our list. So let's say data. Let's say data 3. Let's see what this does for us. There we go. We have this dictionary. We see it's Sierra Leone. So this dictionary represents the country of Sierra Leone. We could dig down a little bit deeper. And this is very common for APIs. We're accessing things in Python as if they're dictionaries, right? We bring them in as dictionaries from JSON. So we could print data 3 and then access some sort of key here. How about, I believe population is a key. And let's see if that gives us the population. It does. So that's the population of Sierra Leone. So we could access that. We could do whatever we desire to. That API, as we see, has a lot of data, 250 countries. I invite you to play around with that. And it's pretty cool. We've just accessed a publicly available API. We've pulled down the data. We've also accessed a website. We've pulled down the data. So this requests module enables us to to do that and becomes instantly a very powerful mechanism, very powerful tool to add to our Python toolkit. So hope that was interesting to you, and glad we could start off with the requests module, and we'll continue on learning about other modules as well.